the year of disruption, challenges, and an incredible amount of transition. We've all experienced numerous changes in how we go about our daily lives, who we see, and how we spend our time. And I know for me personally, on March 13th, when I left my office with a few things in hand, if you had told me, the total and complete extrovert that I am, that this many months later, I'd still be primarily working from home and not traveling throughout the country, I would not have known what to think. But I have to tell you that there have been some real positives in all of this. And the opportunity for us to put on programs like this has been a high point in all of it. I've even planted a garden, and I'm listening to podcasts, things that I never carved out the time to do before. And so the global pandemic, racial injustice, and the upcoming US presidential election are focuses that have ripple effects through every corner of this world. These challenges are really shared experiences among all of us in so many different ways. Our first theme in this program was for the concept of what it means to be a global citizen, how we define it for ourselves and how we live it. In the hustle and bustle of our own lives, it can be certainly easy to become entrenched in all of our day-to-day responsibilities, in what's directly in front of us, and what we feel that we can impact. We can have a bit of a myopic view on what's going on in the world. Our hope is that this three-part series will allow each of us to hear from our faculty and practitioners and listen to the stories of inspiring work being done on campus and throughout the United States and around the world. By participating in this series, we aim to collectively begin thinking about how we might embody global citizenship in our own lives and in all of our communities. So for the first event this afternoon, we'll have several faculty share their insights from their work being done on campus, both research and student experiences. And next week, we'll have a practitioner fireside chat. I don't know about you, but the concept of a fireside chat, as it gets chilly here in South Bend, Indiana, sounds really good. This will focus on what it means to be a global citizen while living here in the United States. And then on October 1st, we'll have a global perspectives discussion, which will also address global citizenship, but from perspectives of living and working in another major region of the world. Throughout this series, we hope to show how interconnected we all are in the 21st century and how the work being done on campus also impacts and relates to what's happening across the US and across the world. We hope you'll find your experience with the Where We're Going series to be insightful and engaging. So now for a little practical point, we ask that if you have questions for our faculty, please use the Google form that we are sharing with you now. This will allow us to facilitate the questions as effectively and as efficiently as possible. And we're going to try to answer as many of them as possible, given our time constraints. I have no doubt that you probably have more questions than we possibly could have time. Through today's discussion, we're bringing together faculty from across campus to share how they're using their passions, their expertise and talents to do amazing and transformative things that impact both student lives and the lives of individuals in the communities where they live and work. As you may recall, when we promoted this event, we shared brief bios on each of our faculty and a few pre-recorded videos or podcasts that shared a little bit more about their past work. For those of you who've not had a chance to review, and I'm sure it's not many of you, I recommend checking them out on ThinkND when you have a minute. And now I'd like to welcome my colleague and friend, Scott Appleby, the Marilyn Keough Dean of the Keough School of Global Affairs and a professor of history. And I dare say as a history major, I lament that I came before him and I never had a chance to have him as my professor, because I hear a lot of great things. He's a distinguished scholar of global religion and a faculty member since 1994. He's a proud Notre Dame alum. He earned his master's and doctoral degrees in history at the University of Chicago. He is the first dean of Notre Dame's newest school in almost 100 years, the Keough School of Global Affairs. Prior to that, he served for 14 years as the Reagan Director of the Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies, which is now part of the Keough School. He's an award-winning scholar who's widely recognized for his contributions in the field of global religion and its role in foreign policy and international relations. Scott is the recipient of 4 honorary doctorates and is a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the American Academy of Political and Social Science. Scott's going to moderate today's discussion, but before I turn it over to him, I'd like to ask one question to kick us off. Scott, you've taught the intro course for the master's program, Integral Human Development, and you've worked with students from so many countries. What have you learned from your students and how they define the concept of global citizenship?
Thanks, Dolly. I have learned a great deal from our students. There were 40 students from 22 different courses, 22 different countries, in a course I taught about 18 months ago. That's kind of typical of the Keough School, 40 students, 22 different countries. So you can imagine the diversity of perspectives and priorities they brought and bring to the Keough School. Everyone in that group and everyone in the school has their own take on what integral human development means, but that's okay. We have a kind of general definition, which I'll share in a moment. But what it means is that we have a kind of common platform. That concept stimulates mutually enriching dialogue and sometimes very vigorous debate with these students and faculty from all points of the compass. But integral human development also provides a much needed common starting point when you have all this diversity. And we all agree about the very fundamental aspect of it, that every human being is a person endowed with dignity, a dignity that cannot be taken away and that must be appreciated and protected. So here's the working definition we start with of integral human development. There will be a quiz later for everyone, so pay attention. Integral human development is the state of a society in which the irreducible dignity of the human person and the cultural and spiritual, as well as the economic and material requirements of human flourishing are central to political and social life and upheld by the rule of law. Okay, that's a mouthful. But what it means is that this is a concept that comes out of Catholic social teaching. It's been expostulated by popes from Paul VI over 50 years ago to Pope Francis today. Every pope refers to this concept. And it means that we're envisioning a society in which human dignity is at the center and the human person is understood not just to be a consumer or a producer or a provider, all of that, but also someone with his or her own cultural and spiritual values, their own languages and histories and cultural location. And so we have to study economics, social science more generally, but also the humanities, engineering, an array of disciplines that bring to bear on the challenges facing the human person. So what does it mean really to say, we're for human dignity? It's easy to say, but how do we begin to think about and implement projects that advance human development, that takes that dignity seriously and that touches upon the full person, the whole person, and with a deep respect for his or her society and cultural values? That in a nutshell is where we start. And then the Keough School, we go from there. So I'll come back to that concept later, but that's the tall elevator speech about integral human development in the Keough School. Well, let me now have the pleasure of introducing to you our panelists today. Many of the faculty devote their work here at the university to values like human dignity, integral human development. They do so through their research, teaching, mentoring of students. With us today to dive further into these concepts and the concept of what it might mean to be a global citizen are 3 such faculty, all of them leaders in their respective fields, and in fulfilling Notre Dame's mission to place scholarship in service to the common good. I'm pleased to welcome first Viva Bartkus, Associate Professor of Management and Organization and Faculty Director of the Meyer Business on the Frontlines program in the Mendoza College of Business. Marya Lieberman, Professor in the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry in the College of Science. And Ray Offenheiser, the William J. Pulte Director of the Pulte Institute for Global Development and Associate Professor of the Practice in the Keough School. So let's start. Viva, if I could start with you, would you share a little bit with us about your background and how it contributes to your work today?
Thank you, Scott. It's an honor to be with you today. Our program, Business on the Frontlines, focuses on harnessing the dynamism, the creativity, the energy of business in helping societies rebuild after conflict or struggle out of deep poverty. The genesis of this program rests on the combination of both my doctoral studies and dissertation research and my experience in industry. So my research focused on national self-determination and secession. I spent 4 years of my life traipsing around with guerrillas and insurgents in Tibet and with the Karen and Kachin in Burma, in East Timor, Mindanao, South Sudan, Kurdistan, Caucasus, the Balkans, and many other places. Basically trying to figure out why communities take up arms to fight for independence. Afterwards, through my decade in industry, I witnessed firsthand the sheer power of business. Coming to Notre Dame gave me the opportunity to combine both of these experiences and to return to these places and explore these themes further, but not just as an observer, but also with a focus on impact. So the objective of Business on the Frontlines was really to figure out how to draw in business into this jigsaw puzzle that is to reknit societies ravaged by war and deep poverty.
Thanks, Viva. Prior to coming to Notre Dame, you were a successful consultant at McKinsey. I think you were the first female and the youngest partner in that Chicago office. So what motivated you to leave that behind and come to Notre Dame?
My first love was really the life of the mind and teaching and mentoring young people. I grew up in a small town in Indiana, born within 35 miles of the Dome. And as a child of Catholic immigrant refugee parents. So when it came time for a change, I knew that Notre Dame was the place for me. No other great university combines faith and reason in the search for truth.
Thanks, Viva. Ray, you're an alumnus with over 40 years of global development experience, including 20 years as president of Oxfam America. Please, if you would, share a little bit about your background and why you decided to dedicate the next phase of your career with us. Or to put the question another way, what was it about my pitch that persuaded you? Was it the constant knocking on your door, the endless phone calls day and night that convinced you? What was it? Why'd you come back? Ray, I think you're muted. Is that right?
I'm unmuted now. Can people hear me?
Yep, we can hear you now fine.
Okay, thanks. I'm delighted to join you all. And frankly, Scott, in answer to your question, I think it was your Louisiana charm more than anything else that did it. But maybe just a little bit on me and then maybe why I came back to the University of Notre Dame. I was very fortunate, as many undergraduates are at the University of Notre Dame, to actually find a terrific mentor in Peter Walsh, who had been a professor, who's now a professor emeriti from the political science department, who basically introduced me to the whole field of international development. And I left the university with sort of this big question of how does one enter the field of international development? What do you focus on? How do you sort of get a grip on a career in this and perhaps even a vocation in this particular field? In my case, I decided, given what was going on in the world in that era, massive famines in Biafra and other parts of the world, to focus on the hunger question. So I ended up spending graduate studies at Cornell studying international development and tropical agriculture. So I know a lot about heat tolerance of various varieties of cattle in the tropics, the impacts of root knot nematodes on root crops, a lot about drip irrigation in drylands, agricultural regions of the world, things that you don't necessarily learn at Notre Dame, but they've served me well over the years. I've continued to focus on the issue of hunger and food security globally, and that continued focus over 40 years that has enabled me really to be part of really global discussions on that issue at the very, very highest levels of the UN and other bodies around the world. As my career advanced, and as Scott mentioned, I became an executive. So while I continued this focus on agriculture, I began to work and supervise people at the Ford Foundation and also at Oxfam on working on issues of human rights, environment, health, education, international relations, a whole range of different issues where we had multiple portfolios at work within these organizations simultaneously, and did a lot of work in Washington on public policy issues on Capitol Hill and at the UN, lobbying on issues like arms control treaties, trade questions, and human rights and humanitarian crisis matters. It's been a terrific career. I feel very blessed that I've been able to be able to be a part of a lot of these kind of global organizations and the work that they do, and really see sort of global citizenship in action at the highest levels in taking on important issues. What brought me back to Notre Dame, apart from Scott's charm, was I was at a point in my career and life where I was ready to slow down a little bit, and so Scott promised that I could come to Notre Dame and slow down. That promise hasn't necessarily been lived out in practice, according to my wife. But most importantly, I was a part of the Keough Institute Advisory Board for many years, for almost 20 plus years. And in some ways I was in the kitchen when the idea for the Keough School emerged. And I found that a really exciting proposition, because for a number of years on that Keough board, I was really pushing for the university to be more outwardly engaged in the world on important public policy issues, and for the research agenda to embrace public policy. But we really didn't have the vehicle to do that. And the idea that now we were going to create a school of global affairs that was going to have a policy thrust, that was going to be working on these global issues, was really, for me, an extraordinarily exciting proposition. And it was going to be a big project that was going to require a lot of attention to building new programs, new initiatives of all varieties, and pulling together all the exciting resources of the university that were already in place, but had not been focused in a laser sharp way toward these kinds of issues of global citizenship and global public welfare. And so, so in many ways, it's just the idea, the moment, the opportunity of the Keough School really is what brought me back to Notre Dame. And I would also just simply say the idea that one can have a long career and then give back to the institution that gave you the vocation, that doesn't get any better than that. I would just close by just simply saying, Jack Brennan, who's the chair of the board of directors of Notre Dame right now, has said in public and to me a couple of times that the Keough School and the creation of the Keough School may be one of the most transformative things Notre Dame's done in the last, probably 5 decades. So it'll be interesting to see how it unfolds.
Thanks, Ray. I think you can all tell that slowing down for Ray means going only twice as fast as the rest of us, rather than 3 or 4 times as fast. So we're delighted you're with us, Ray. Marya, we really like to hear a little bit about your background now and your work.
Great. Well, I'm an analytical chemist, and like many scientists and engineers, I want my work and my students to help solve real problems in the world. But most science research today is sort of focused on the global north. And so I rarely met scientists from developing countries. But because I'm at Notre Dame, I had opportunities to make these connections. So through the Eck Institute and the Institute for Global Development, I had opportunities to learn about global problems like the falsification of pharmaceuticals. And also, these resources at Notre Dame helped me form collaborations with researchers. So in 2017, the Institute for Global Development organized a travel to Bangladesh for a group of faculty. And I met a scientist at the Cholera Institute in Dhaka, and we've been collaborating since then. So he runs covert shoppers. They collect medicines from small shops in rural Bangladesh, and we provide analysis of those medicines. So currently we are collaborating with the regulatory authorities in Bangladesh to try to track down an operation that's selling amoxicillin, which consists of chalk instead of antibiotics. And I've also been able, I figure since I have 2 ears and 1 mouth, I've been listening a lot when I go on these trips, and I've been able to learn a lot about how businesses, non-governmental organizations, and regulatory agencies perceive the problem of these substandard and falsified medicines, and what barriers they experience trying to solve that problem.
Thanks, Marya. We're so proud that your research is being applied in these central areas. So thanks. Ray, let's go a little bit deeper with you. You know, in 3 short years that you've been on our faculty, you've almost accomplished the 5-year plan. So you transformed the Notre Dame Initiative for Global Development into today's very exciting Pulte Institute for Global Development, and you're the William J. Pulte director of that institute. You've expanded the faculty, the staff, and the overall capacity while teaching and developing young development professionals in training. And in your spare time, you've collaborated on over 65 development projects that span the globe. And in your spare time recently, you just oversaw a successful proposal for global education, leading to the largest grant Notre Dame has ever received from the federal government. So, remembering that you only have 2 minutes to talk about all this, tell us a little bit about your work in the Keough School and what it means for Notre Dame's evolving role in the world. Good luck.
Great, Scott. I'll try to do it in 2 minutes. So just very quickly, Marya actually mentioned the Initiative for Global Development, which is actually an organization or entity within the university that was created about 10 years ago to do precisely what Marya described, which is actually enable faculty to get off the campus and have a really exciting new kind of experience in research on a contemporary global topic. We started initially 10 years ago with some startup capital from Notre Dame Research with the idea to promote interdisciplinary research on topics of contemporary global importance around the world and enable faculty to have precisely that kind of experience. Started modestly with 1 or 2 staff and with that core investment from Notre Dame Research. Today, we're now the Pulte Institute, having gotten some endowed funding from the Pulte family. We now have 22 staff. We've over that 10-year period, we've participated in been directing some 68 unique projects around the world. We now have some 350 international partner institutions that we work with, including universities in the US, think tanks, abroad, university and not-for-profit organization partners. We have 120 faculty fellows like Marya who work with us and who are available to kind of contemplate whether they want to join one of these projects at any given time. I think it's fair to say we're seeing a lot of momentum and a lot of growing interest in what we're doing. I think Scott just mentioned this grant that we received, very exciting grant that will actually have us working on improving educational achievement and innovation across the world. The grant comes from USAID for about $40 million, and we'll be working in partnership with academics and researchers and educational innovators all over the world for the next 5 years on that particular program. I think probably maybe just a couple of things on the Keough School, on the Pulte Institute itself. Our focus within the Keough School is really to embrace these issues of poverty and inequality as kind of core to our mission as a contributor to the Keough School, and really to do 2 or 3 basic things. One is drive research on globally relevant issues for faculty, not only within the Keough School, but across the university, to take on teaching roles and student engagement actively and offer all kinds of opportunities for students to either engage in research. We offer courses, we have training programs, we have experiential learning that they can take advantage of, and also help the school as it thinks about and begins to become emergent in the policy domain in Washington and globally. There's increasing demand for what we're doing. We're just seeing tremendous growth in terms of student interest and faculty interest. It explains a little bit how our staff has grown so quickly, and we've been able to sort of grow the size of grants and number of grants that we're receiving. So it's a very exciting time for me to be at the Pulte Institute, playing this leadership role and working with Scott in building the capacity of research within the Keough School and beyond. And I have to say the experience lived up to all my expectations of what Scott had initially promised.
Thanks, Ray. I would just want to add about this great grant on research applied to global education, that it focuses on the more marginalized, the poorer populations of children from grade school through high school and into higher education. How do we conduct research that allows us to deliver more effective education to populations that have been overlooked? So it really does focus again on that integral human development theme of it, particularly reaching out to the underprivileged and the underserved. So we're very proud of that. Marya, you said a little bit in your earlier comment about your research, the creating test strips to detect counterfeit drugs in Kenya back in 2013, the water testing to detect lead in 2017 is among that. And now turning your attention to these testing kits to identify fake amoxicillin in Bangladesh. Go a little deeper with us now, if you could, and talk about, I'd like to hear how you conceptualize a research project. This is a big question. And then as you think about the impact and the outcome, as you're thinking, how does this research lead to a kind of a maximum impact? Obviously, the topics are so central to human health. So tell us a little bit more about how you conceptualize it and implement those projects.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it really ties back into installing the requirements for human flourishing under the rule of law. So the pharmaceutical market in low and middle income countries is a $300 billion market, but the World Health Organization estimates that about 1 out of every 10 of those pharmaceutical products is substandard or fake. And so here's an example. So this is an anti-malarial medication that's used all over sub-Saharan Africa. And this is a fake version of it. So it's a counterfeit where the pills consist only of starch and yellow food coloring. And these kinds of products consume a lot of money. If 10% of the products are fake, that's $300 billion times 10%, or $30 billion that are being spent on these fake products. And also they contribute to bad patient outcomes. It's surprising, but there's no global system to monitor the quality of drugs. And so each country is on its own. And so if the country doesn't have the analytical resources to test the medicines within its borders, which is very difficult because there's more than 30,000 manufacturers who are selling pharmaceuticals globally, those countries are just kind of stuck. And we have seen a lot of capacity issues. So for example, in Kenya, I had a student who spent 8 weeks living in the Dandora region of Nairobi. And while he was there, he worked with small medicine shop owners and collected more than 100,000 pages of sales records from these shop owners and distributors in this slum area of Nairobi. And he found that most of the drugs, the stocks of drugs, sell out in about 6 months. But when the drug regulators go to do post-market surveillance, that whole process takes them about 2 years. They spend a lot of time collecting samples, and then those samples have to wait in a queue to get into the analysis lab. And so it typically takes between 1 and 3 years for them to just get the results. And so practically that means that they can't detect these fake products in time to get them out of the market. So we knew that we needed a faster way to check drug quality. And I worked with my students to develop paper test cards that could be used to quickly screen the quality of medicines. So the cards carry out 12 different color tests and create a color barcode. So if the manufacturers use the wrong ingredients, or if the drugs are degraded, then you get the wrong barcode on the card. The cards work pretty well. We did a study in Tanzania. We worked with the Tanzanian equivalent of the FDA, and 20 of the drug inspectors checked over 3,000 samples of medicines, and their accuracy was about 94% with the cards. So we're really excited about this result. Computers are really good at reading color barcodes, and so the next research direction that we're working on is teaching computers how to read these barcodes and then turning that into a phone app. So I do want to stress the importance, just like for all of us, I think our experience in traveling and working in developing world settings has been really critical to our pathways. And that's also important for students. And so that's one of the things that I've tried to work on with my own graduate and undergraduate students, is to give them that same opportunity of traveling and working in developing world settings.
Thank you. That's terrific. Fascinating. I will not get into the challenges you and so many other people face right now in conducting this research in the field on the ground. We're all struggling to figure out the way to continue our research when travel is complicated, but I know there are a lot of creative solutions. Viva, you talked a little bit earlier about the Business on the Front Lines course, and you started it back in 2008. I wanted to hear about the inspiration for the course and help us understand, the substance of it. And also, now that you've got this terrific endowment from Ken and Susan Meyer, how you see it expanding now that that innovation has been rewarded this way.
Well, Business on the Front Lines enables graduate students from across the university, including Mendoza, the law school, the Keough school, to partner with locally based action organizations in some of the toughest parts of the world, like Bosnia, Colombia, Tunisia, Honduras, Sri Lanka, just to name a few. Together, the student teams and partners work together on business and peace-related projects. As students collaborate with their partners on these projects, they have the opportunity to hone their problem-solving skills in highly complex and ambiguous environments, while also accompanying the communities they are serving. So let's take an example. Over the last 3 years, our Business on the Front Lines teams have been serving in Colombia. After the historic peace accords between the government and the FARC guerrillas were signed in 2016, one of the major challenges was how to reincorporate ex-combatants into the Colombian economy and ultimately Colombian society. 54 years of civil war, however, left deep cleavages in society, so much so that it became very clear very quickly that no one would hire the former FARC guerrillas, as they were perceived as perpetrators of violence. So our teams pivoted quickly. If the former FARC guerrillas needed jobs to make the peace process work and no one would hire them, then we needed to help them launch their own businesses. We have been partnering with a local organization dedicated to conflict transformation and economic opportunity, Paso, Colombia, to work with the former combatants in their resettlement zones to build small, sustainable agricultural businesses. And then when these businesses lacked outlets for their products, lacked markets and customers, we then worked with our local partner to organize rural campesino markets so that they could sell their products. The new endowment from the Meyer family will enable us to go far beyond what we've currently done and extend our partnerships even further, taking on more students and more projects. Along the way, our graduate students learn viscerally that it is a privilege to use their capabilities to serve others.
Great. Thanks, Viva. I'm going to just signal to the panel that since we're running a little late, I'm going to combine the next two sets of questions, which are about your motivation and inspiration for the work you do, and also about the impact. And Viva, if I could stay with you, because you've kind of indicated some of the impact of Business on the Front Lines. Maybe say a little bit more about the range of kinds of impact you're anticipating, and also the inspiration, your own inspiration for doing this work.
The inspiration for Business on the Front Lines really comes from my Catholic faith. As it is written in Genesis, then the Lord God took man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. So Business on the Front Lines has now served over 60 projects in 30 countries, over 30 local partners. My observation from the service in the field is that there's incredible dignity in a good day's work. And this is the same across continents and cultures and backgrounds. It's, as you yourself so eloquently described, integrated human development. One of the main parts of integrated human development is work, as work makes life more meaningful and worthy. Now, on the impact of business on the front lines, it really comes from the ground up. With each local partner, we continue to develop pragmatic local solutions to overcome some of the challenges to building businesses and setting the economic conditions for growth. Our impact is twofold, both within the communities we serve and through our students. And we keep score, as you might imagine a business school would keep score, through the number of sustainable businesses launched and the jobs created. From a more recent external review of all of our projects, they calculated that perhaps 10,000 people now have jobs that would not have had them had we not worked on our projects together. For our students, I think they undergo a journey of discovery in which they travel to the margins, touch the other, and are in turn touched themselves. They learn by doing, they learn by directly collaborating with those who may be different from themselves, that they can together both imagine and create common ground.
Great, thank you, Viva. Marya, you know, these questions about motivation for all of you can seem a little odd. In other words, so the question is, why would you be working so hard to make sure that people get the right drugs and not fake drugs, and clean water, not dirty water? I guess the answer is you're a good person, but say more than that. You know, why were you drawn to this particular kind of work? And you've also indicated a little bit about impact, but what do you project going forward of, you know, Viva gave some data, some metrics on that. Tell us about the motivation and then how you see the impact.
I mean, I think there's scientific research that shows that even rats have empathy for other rats, and will, you know, if a rat is stuck in a box, they'll help let it out, right? To, you know, so this idea of fairness is a really basic idea. And we react to, when a situation is unfair, we react to that viscerally. So, you know, in Ethiopia in 2018, we tested the chemotherapy drugs that were being used in the hospital, the Black Lion Hospital in Addis Ababa. And we found that every sample that we tested was substandard, with only 54% of the stated concentration of cisplatin. So Ethiopia is just getting started, like many low and middle income countries, on providing chemotherapy to people who are afflicted with cancer. And there is some manufacturer out there that's taking advantage of that. Chemotherapy drugs are very difficult to analyze because they're toxic and hard to handle. And so it's not right for someone to be making money off of that. So that's kind of been my motivation. But I think that the impact is that when we develop technologies that work in low resource settings in Ethiopia, we also gain from reciprocal innovations. Those same technologies can be used in low resource settings in the United States. So for example, we're now developing a test card that we can use in harm reduction settings. So these are settings where people are coming because they intend to take an illicit drug. They're going to shoot up heroin or something, and they want to get to do it in a way that doesn't kill them. And that involves things like needle exchange, but also checking the drugs that they're taking to make sure that the drugs don't contain lethal concentrations of opioids. And so I feel like the work has benefits in, you know, the work you do outside your home also has benefits in your home.
Great, thank you. I'm going to try to figure out how to work rats care about other rats into my IHD, integral human development pitch. But that was
Okay, very good.
that doesn't that there's more to the nobility behind what you're doing than that. But that's a good starting point.
We are all, you know, we're all mammals.
That's right.
So.
Good. Let me then ask Ray, shift to Ray and ask the same question, which is, Ray, I'll put it this way to you. Both the Initiative for Global Development and now the Pulte Institute, one of your trademarks, what you're known for around the world, is monitoring and evaluation. How do you monitor these development projects? How do you evaluate their effectiveness? How do you set them up so they will be effective? So let's turn that to the Pulte Institute. What are your metrics for evaluating the Pulte Institute and its impact, both what you started, but as you look ahead, you know, the motivation you have going forward to push the Pulte Institute in the direction that meets the metrics that you have in mind?
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, I mean, as you said, I mean, one of the key things that is a core competency, I suppose you might say, of the Pulte Institute is our ability to do monitoring and evaluation of programs of the U.S. government, the United Nations, other major entities of the U.S. government that work internationally, as well as even corporations. And so we have a skill set and a set of professionals who do that on a regular basis. And so maybe that's one thing maybe to understand about, I suppose you might say, some of the day-to-day work of the Pulte Institute. But in thinking about our own work, I mean, I think we've actually talked about this, and I think we've come up with sort of 6 basic questions that we feel like we need to be asking ourselves on an annual basis to evaluate, you know, who we are and are we really, you know, succeeding at what we, you know, who we think we are and what we think we should be doing. And maybe just quickly, I will list them in the interest of time so we can move on to the Q&A. But basically, they are we serving students? And how effectively and in what ways are we serving students? You know, and some of the things I talked about, courses, experiential learning, and so forth. We're trying to experiment with all of these ways of engaging students and testing whether, in fact, you know, where the demand is and what students, you know, are really interested in doing in terms of engaging with the issues that we work on. Even engaging in field-based project research of the sort that Marya was describing. The second question we ask ourselves is, are we serving the research agenda of the university and creating new and exciting opportunities for Notre Dame staff to engage the world in new and different ways, in exactly the way that Marya described in her opening comments? There are many faculty who've come to us, or we've gone to them and said, you know, would you like to join this interesting project on, you know, accessing, you know, we're helping people access water or engage in an irrigation program or study, you know, some infectious disease in a developing country. They might not have contemplated it, but they may engage with us, and then in some ways it then becomes very central to their research agenda going forward. How well are we doing in that is something that we're constantly asking ourselves. Are we serving the mission of the university to assist those less fortunate? Are we really representing the integral human development proposition and value premise that Scott has been elucidating? And are we amplifying that impact of the university at scale and reach across the world in ways that, you know, the university really has indicated it would want us to do? Fourth question I think we ask ourselves is, are we building the types of high quality institutional partnerships across the globe to be a highly effective leader in our field? Our core belief is that in today's world in international development, we should be working ourselves out of a job. So we should be building strong institutional partners in the countries where development work is going on. And so in some ways, as a university, we have certain resources that many universities and not-for-profits and think tanks don't have in the developing world. We can add value to their work, but our core premise should be helping strengthen them through the kind of partnerships that we have. Fifth question, are we building the capability to secure to be highly successful in securing the grants required to sustain and grow our global identity as the Pulte Institute? In other words, we are and we're set up to basically be an institution within the university acquiring grants, and it's a very complicated world out there and very competitive world out there in securing grants. And so we have to establish profile, establish credibility, and establish that we deliver quality products. Are we doing that? And finally, are we making a difference in key policy on issues of poverty and inequality, both at home and abroad? And this policy agenda is one that, you know, that Scott has really taken a leadership role in trying to drive the university and the Keough School forward in building. And we feel that we have a significant role to play in doing that. And so we're constantly asking ourselves, what do we need to be doing operationally and through our research to actually add value in that domain?
Great, thank you very much. We're going to shift right now to questions. A number of questions have been coming in from the audience. So thank you, Ray. Thanks, Marya. Thanks, Viva, for your answers thus far. I'm going to tie a couple of these questions together, frame it this way for you, and then each of you take a crack at it. I'll start with a little response on my part. So some of the questions are around this issue. Let me put it my own way. The title, the concept global citizen, that could be a little fuzzy, right? What does that mean? We're global citizens. Does it mean we're no longer citizens of our own nations? And how does this align, this global citizen idea, with Catholic teaching? So a kind of healthy, if not skepticism necessarily, but I kind of clarify this concept. What is it about? I'll start very quickly on the Catholic social teaching piece, which is the easy way out on a question like this, is that Catholicism is always both and. And if you look at the history of the 20th century in Catholic teaching, of course, there were some episodes in the early 20th century when the church got a little bit too close to nationalism and too identified with particular nation states. And then the church in the 60s under Pope John the 23rd stepped back and reviewed and revisited, and Paul VI, the too close alignment with national identities from the point of view of the church. But the church has never taught, as far as I know, that one shouldn't be a good citizen of one's own nation. But the church has also said, and in Pacem in Terris and in other encyclicals in the second half of the 20th century, there's a very strong thread of argument that in a world that is increasingly interdependent, increasingly globalized, that if we care about human flourishing, human dignity, the freedom of all peoples, whether they're Catholic or not, that we have to think globally. And the term global citizenship, I'm not sure if that was used as such, but there has been an ongoing dialogue in the church about how we live together as citizens of the planet. And some dialogue with the concept like the UN, never without criticism, but what would it mean for the nations to really collaborate through trade, through diplomacy, through some kind of shared governance, which is very difficult for nations to give up any of their sovereignty. So Catholic teaching on this is complicated, in short, but it certainly does not exclude the idea of thinking globally and thinking about something like a concept of citizenship, even while we contribute along the lines of the gospel to our individual communities, local, state, and national. So that's my brief take on it. But there's a lot to these questions. What is global citizenship? What does it mean? How do you take it? How do we align it with Notre Dame's mission? Viva, I'm going to start with you, if you don't mind.
Certainly, Scott. Throw me the toughest of questions first. Are we global citizens or are we local citizens? For me, my perspective is the honest answer is that we are made of two intertwined parts. One part shares a common humanity with all on this planet. We share similar dreams. We feel loss and fear. We cherish hopes for our children. But the other part is a fierce pride in our unique identities, family, tradition, heritage, background. I'm very proud of my Lithuanian family, my Indiana Catholic roots, and of course of our Notre Dame football team. And so to me, the question then becomes, the challenge is how do we embrace the first without being frightened by the second? How can we celebrate these differences within our common humanity? So the question then back to you, Scott.
I'm not answering now. I'm just going to turn it over to Ray, who will answer that question for us.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll offer maybe a bit of a social science kind of a response to this. You know, this whole discussion about global citizenship and coming together as peoples around common norms really began in the early 20th century with Woodrow Wilson's effort to create the League of Nations. And that promoted a kind of a discussion about even the concept of the early concept of global citizenship, through the sort of debate about should we have a kind of a world federalist movement that would kind of pull together the nations of the world and overcome the sort of the kind of nationalist fervor we saw in the early 20th century that led to really 2 world wars and massive persecution across Europe and Asia. It took root really after the Second World War with the creation of the United Nations and the building of a much more integrated international system, where actually governments and peoples agreed on certain kinds of norms of behavior, and the whole area of international law began to kind of become codified. Now, the tricky bit about the word citizen is that a citizen presumes that one, is a citizen of a state, and that state is responsible for the protection of the basic rights that would come with any kind of citizenship. So we are first and foremost citizens of a state, and the state is the guarantor of our fundamental rights. So one of the challenges then is, if I am a citizen of the United States and the United States is the guarantor of rights, rights do not exist without a state as guarantor, in fact. So I have to look to my government here in the United States as the fundamental protector of my basic security, my livelihood, my economic well-being, the overall order of the universe in which I live, as do citizens in any other country. But then when we go to this concept of global citizenship, it does get a little fuzzy in the sense that, can I rely on international law to protect my job security? Can I rely on international law to protect what aspects of my daily life? Can I rely on the international system and the United Nations to provide basic protections? And in that discussion, there's a lot of tension. And right now we're going that proposition of international law as provided for under the United Nations is under question. And the United States is actually one of the major inquisitors on this question. And the United States is really basically put forward this whole notion of US exceptionalism. In other words, we create certain norms for everybody else, but we don't want to participate in them. So how do we presume to be citizens of the world when we can't realize a kind of a unified federalist system? I don't think a federalist system will ever necessarily be realized, but I do think one of the terrific things about global citizenship as an idea is it does recognize that we live in an interdependent world. It does sort of suggest that we might accept the idea that my security depends on your security. And if anything, COVID is a lesson in that. It also suggests that my well-being depends on your well-being, which is a whole premise for international development and contributions for international development. And maybe just to the point on environment, our well-being depends on our collective care of the planet, its environment, its natural resources, its biodiversity. And our collective well-being, at a minimum, relies on the fact that we agree on some basic normative principles of behavior and collaboration that allow us to live together in peace. And all the work that goes on to build constructs that limit war, which is really the premise for creating the United Nations, we're at the heart of that. So let me stop there, Scott.
Thanks. Marya, I'm going to give you a really heavy-duty assignment unfairly. You've got 2.5 minutes to answer this question about global citizenship. But there's another thread of questions we received that one of it was specifically about your work. And it does follow on Ray's comment about the state as the guarantor of rights and the role of governments more generally. And that is, as we think about global national citizenship, what ways do we have to ensure that governments who might have access to your research actually follow through with the support they need? How do we, it seems it's difficult for us to be only researchers if in fact we are so dependent upon the state in many ways to implement the research and the recommendations, policy recommendations. So if you could somehow talk about citizenship globally, nationally, but how it affects your own work.
Yeah, well, one thing that I have learned in doing this work is that I am not solving a chemistry problem. The chemistry part has been solved. We know how to analyze the quality of drugs. The problem is a law problem, and it's a business problem, and it's a problem of what people expect as their due as patients. And so as a scientist, I'm part of a community of scientists that spans the globe. And our task is to provide light. We can shed light on what is the situation, what brands are good quality and bad quality. But how to solve those problems depends on their being recognized as problems and then acted on by people who have the proper authority to do that. And so I feel like I can kick up a ruckus, I can give people information, but the task of solving the problem in each country, that has to be shouldered by people who are really familiar with that country's system, how that system works. The international resources also exist. So there's a global system for disseminating information about bad quality products. And but we are really interested in this. Maybe someone can come up with a Yelp for pharmaceuticals, you know, where we can make some of this information more public so that the people who are purchasing the medicines have access. Right now, the information is very asymmetrically distributed. And yeah.
Well, Marya, that was very eloquent. Thank you. Very well put. And it is, I'll conclude with a shameless self-promotional plug for the university. When your point about the need for complementary efforts by people who understand politics and government and business and law, that's what we're trying to do as a university. We're bringing these various areas of expertise that you've heard about today. And the University of Notre Dame is evolving in a wonderful way over the last number of years, where as a dean, I can say there's more and more enthusiasm and incentives for cross-college, cross-unit collaboration, precisely so that we can be in our lane, so to speak, with our areas of expertise like yours, Marya, and Viva's and Ray's, but we're also collaborating and working together in many ways. I think you've all referred to other units and other disciplines in your presentations. So thank you for that. We're getting near the end, so let me thank everyone for joining us today, all of you who were listening in or viewing, participating in this. Next week, we'll meet again at the same time and hear from Michael Camilleri, director of the Peter D. Bell Rule of Law Program, from Inter-American Dialogue, and from Tara Kenny, who's a Keough School Advisory Board member and faith-based social impact investor at TCK Global Advisors. Ray will moderate next week's discussion. To prepare for it, please check out the videos and resources we have on ThinkND. Also, please feel free to share this series with your friends. We are accepting registrations throughout the entire program, as each meeting can stand alone. So let me conclude right at 2 o'clock by thanking our Alumni Association team that put this all together. They did great work. And my colleagues, Marya, Lieberman, Viva, Bartkus, and Ray Offenheiser. Good to see all of you.